came here chasing a better life too, huh? The so-called land of opportunity. Liberty City. Skyscrapers, suits, dirty money, and broken dreams. Everyone's got a story here, but most don't end well. Still, you keep pushing. Because maybe, just maybe, there's something waiting at the end of the grind. A little peace, a little rest. Well, I've got something for you. Give me your ears for a while, and I'll give you quiet. No noise, no pressure, no past, just you. And the sound of the city fading away. Liberty City never sleep, but you will. You think Vice City and Los Santos are some kind of vacation? Go ahead. Chase the sun, kiss the pavement, make some enemies. Just don't expect mercy. Not every city forgives. The rain hit Liberty City like a warning. A cold, relentless downpour that turned the streets slick with reflections of neon lights and bad decisions. Every alley whispered of unfinished business. Every shadow carried the weight of forgotten debts. This city didn't forgive, didn't forget. And neither did Vincent Vic Morelli. Vic had been gone for 5 years. 5 years locked behind bars, watching the world move without him. But now he was back, and the city hadn't changed. Not really. The skyline still clawed at the stormy sky. The avenues still reeked of ambition and desperation. And the people, well, the people still played the same crooked games. He stepped off the bus at Broker Terminal, his boots hitting the wet pavement like a promise. The duffel bag over his shoulder was light, just the bare essentials. But the weight in his chest was heavier than ever. He wasn't just back to survive. He was back to take control. Liberty had betrayed him once. Now, it was his turn to rewrite the rules. Relentless rain battered the Broker Terminal, turning the streets of Liberty City into glistening mirrors of shattered dreams and haunting memories. Antonio Russo stepped off the bus with nothing more than a worn leather bag and a heaviness in his heart. A burden of past betrayals and unresolved promises, every step. On the muddy sidewalks of Broker echoed with the murmurs of those who had come before him, each corner whispering both redemption and ruin. His journey led him through the winding alleys of Broker, where the soft hum of distant voices mixed with the luster of neon reflections on rain-soaked pavement. The city's pulse quickened as he left Broker behind, his footsteps carrying him toward Duke's. Here the raw brutality of the streets melded with the rugged elegance etched into the peeling concrete of worn residential buildings. In Duke's, every shadow and every graffitied wall told a story of survival and relentless ambition. The path then drew him into Bohan, where an air of melancholy hung over the block. In this forgotten quarter, darkened alleys and faded murals whispered the laments of those who had fallen, while persistent signs of struggle painted a picture of a community fighting against time. Yet, even in its despair, Bohan exuded an enigmatic allure, a silent promise that even the most battered souls might find a way to endure. Finally, Antonio reached Algonquin, the pulsating heart of Liberty City. Before him rose a skyline of glittering skyscrapers and neon lit facades that boasted the towering ambitions of a modern empire. In Algonquin, the shimmer of high-end storefronts clashed with the hungry stares of the marginalized, and the cacophony of honking taxis and clattering traffic formed an unsettling symphony of urban life. Here, the dance of modernity and decay was raw and unvarnished, a stark reminder of the chasm between fortune and misfortune. In every neighborhood, in every forgotten alleyway, Liberty City murmured promises of new beginnings, even as it threatened with the specter of betrayal. With a heavy heart and steely determination, Antonio Russo realized that his return was merely the opening chapter of a long, arduous journey, a journey where the entwined paths of past and present could lead either to rebirth or to inevitable doom. Antonio Russo stepped off the cold pavement of Algonquin, his mind buzzing with all the memories that had haunted him since his arrival. The dazzling glare of the skyscrapers did little to mask the undercurrent of decay and corruption that pulsed beneath Liberty City's glittering surface. With each step, the city's relentless energy seemed to pull him deeper into its labyrinth, as if it were daring him to confront the ghosts of his past. He moved quickly through the busy streets, weaving among neon-drenched sidewalks and slick back alleys, determined to locate an old contact known only as Frankie, a man reputed to have survived yet another close brush with the city's darker elements. Frankie's safe house was tucked away in a nondescript building near the heart of Algonquin, a part of the city where fortunes swung as wildly as the billboards above. Antonio knew that if he was going to reclaim his identity and settle old scores, he needed allies who could navigate the treacherous channels of this urban jungle. As Antonio pushed forward, his thoughts drifted back to the promise of a new beginning. Once, Liberty City had been his whole world, a place where every decision was scrutinized by the harsh light of street justice. Now, with time, having both scarred him and taught him the value of trust, he felt an urgent need to rewrite the rules that had once condemned him. The rain had tapered into a persistent drizzle, each drop a reminder of the city's enduring sorrow, yet it also spoke of cleansing and reinvention. Reaching a shabby yet bustling diner on the corner of a busy intersection, Antonio paused at the door. Inside, the low hum of conversation mingled with the clatter of cups and the hiss of the coffee machine, an unlikely refuge for secrets and deals alike. He spotted Frankie in a shadowed booth at the back, his eyes darting around in a mixture of wariness and anticipation. Without a word, Antonio slid into the seat opposite him, the leather creaking under the weight of unspoken histories. "Long time, Antonio," Frankie murmured, his voice gravelly from years of hardship and whispered conspiracies. "Liberty City doesn't change, and neither do its prisoners." Antonio's gaze was steady, his own voice low and measured. "I'm not here to be a prisoner anymore," he replied. "I'm here to settle accounts and build something that isn't stained by betrayal." Frankie's eyes flickered with a spark of recognition. Between bites of a half-forgotten greasy meal, he outlined a network of trusted faces across Broker, Dukes, and even the forgotten stretches of Bohan that still bristled with raw potential. If Antonio could forge alliances with those willing to stand beside him against the corrupt powers that had kept them all in check, then perhaps Liberty City could be remade, piece by piece, street by street. As the conversation unfolded, the diner's fluorescent lights cast long shadows over rugged faces and tired eyes, all of them part of the eternal fabric of this city. Antonio listened intently, his vision growing clearer with every whispered word of conspiracy and hope. This wasn't just about reclaiming lost honor, it was about igniting a movement, a transformation that would ripple out from the cracked sidewalks of Algonquin to the grimy corners of Broker. Leaving the relative warmth of the diner, Antonio found himself once again swallowed by the ceaseless rhythm of the city. He passed by familiar landmarks, the faded mural in Dukes depicting a long-forgotten revolution, the towering, indifferent billboards of Algonquin promising luxury amidst decay, and knew that every one of them was a testament to Liberty City's enduring struggle. There was no time to pause. With a renewed sense of purpose, he sank into the steady rumble of a waiting cab, his destination clear and his resolve hardened. Tonight, Antonio Russo would begin to weave a new chapter in the story of Liberty City. A chapter where the past's betrayals would serve only as lessons, and every broken promise was the seed for something stronger. In the muted glow of streetlights and the promise of a rain-cleansed dawn, his journey toward redemption was in full swing, a defiant stride into a future that belonged to those brave enough to reshape their destiny. Antonio Russo stepped out of the cab into the chill pre-dawn air of Algonquin, every raindrop on the slick pavement echoing the determined rhythm of his heart. The cab's door shut behind him with a soft thud, leaving him alone with the murmurs of a city that had long perfected the art of whispered promises and veiled threats. He pulled his collar up and strode toward an inconspicuous side street where the shadows of half-forgotten storefronts and flickering neon signs merged into a single, pulsing heartbeat. As he neared a narrow passage between towering glass facades and aging brick structures, the subtle scent of wet asphalt mixed with the faint aroma of strong coffee and cigarettes, a reminder that even at this hour, Liberty City never truly slept. Here, in a hidden alcove off Bridge Street, a discreet meeting was already in motion. Antonio recognized a familiar figure leaning against a low, hung fire escape, a wary man known as Johnny Knives, whose reputation for swift and silent operations was as legendary as the harsh truths he traded in. Russo. Johnny greeted in a hushed tone as Antonio approached, his eyes scanning the murk of the early light. The city's stirring. Word is, the undercurrents are shifting. People in Dukes and Broker are tired of the old overlords. They're ready for something new. And you're at the center of it all? The words ignited the embers of Antonio's resolve. Johnny handed him a crumpled piece of paper, its ink smeared slightly by the persistent drizzle. A map detailing clandestine routes that wound through the forgotten backstreets of Dukes, Broker, and even the neglected corners of Bohan. Each route was marked with meeting points, safe houses, and coded notations that promised both security and subversion. This network of secret pathways, meticulously drawn by those who defied the city's corruption, was the key to galvanizing his long-anticipated uprising. Antonio's gaze shifted upward as the first hints of daylight began to erase the darkness of the sky. The sound of early traffic and low murmurs of awakening residents melded with the distant rumble of subway trains heavy with commuters. Every noise was a note in a sprawling symphony of resilience and rebellion. In that moment, the map in his hand wasn't just a static diagram. It was a blueprint for rewriting the fate of Liberty City. His mind raced with the possibilities of converting these aging transit routes into channels for smuggling resources, rallying disillusioned allies, and ultimately challenging those who had once betrayed him. Without pausing to reconsider, Antonio pressed forward. He followed the map's instructions to a nondescript door in a dilapidated building on the border of Broker, its peeling paint and rusted lock belying the strength that lay beyond. Inside, a motley assembly of local fixers, former street soldiers, and disenfranchised citizens had gathered in a room lit only by the soft flicker of a single overhead fluorescent bulb. Their faces, lined by hardship and etched by the relentless grind of urban life, turned toward him, each one reflecting the silent hope that mingled with their quiet desperation. For a long, charged minute, no one spoke. Then the room's leader, a grizzled woman known simply as Rosa, stepped forward. Antonio, we've seen too many lives wasted on promises that never came. You're the one who's got the grit to turn the city's pain into power. We're with you. If you can show us a future beyond the decay. Her words resonated deeply, echoing the sentiments that Antonio had carried with him since his return. This was no longer a solitary quest for vindication. It was the beginning of a communal uprising. Every whispered plan in that dim, lit room, every careful nod exchanged among these hardened souls, reaffirmed the idea that Liberty City still held the potential for transformation. Bonds were forged in that space. Bonds steeped in shared loss, mutual distrust of the old order, and a burning desire to reclaim their lives from the grip of corruption. As Antonio outlined his strategy, using the secret routes marked on the map to establish rapid response networks and safe drop-offs all across the boroughs. He could almost see the layered skyline of Liberty City shift in his mind's eye. Broker's melancholic avenues, Duke's raw defiance, Bohan's quiet persistence, and Algonquin's shimmering promise formed a mosaic of potential, each neighborhood ready to join the call for change. The meeting dissolved as quickly as it had convened, the assembled allies dispersing into the labyrinth of back streets and side alleys to spread the word and secure the necessary footholds. Antonio lingered a moment longer, staring out through a grimy window as the city's early light battled the lingering shadows. Every pulsating heartbeat of Liberty City, every drip of rain, every echo of footsteps spoke of a renaissance on the horizon, one fueled by the courage of those who refused to remain mere subjects under a regime of neglect. With the blueprint for rebellion securely in hand and the promise of solidarity echoing in his ears, Antonio Russo stepped back into the rain-soaked streets. His journey was far from over. Now, under the fledgling glow of a new day, the battle for Liberty City was poised to escalate, and he, at its vanguard, was ready to lead the charge into a future that would no longer be defined by betrayal, but by the indomitable will of those daring enough to claim their destiny. Antonio Russo moved with silent purpose through the labyrinth of Liberty City's back alleys, leaving behind the dim shelter of the derelict community center and stepping back into the endless drizzle of rain. The night was heavy with anticipation. Every puddle and flickering street lamp, a muted witness to the transformation slowly taking shape within the city's core. His mind raced with tactical plans and an unyielding vision, one that sought to overturn decades of corruption and revive the spirit of neighborhoods long forsaken. As he navigated a maze of narrow corridors and graffiti-tagged walls leading back to Broker, the familiar urban symphony enveloped him. The distant rumble of subway trains, the low murmur of late-night conversations, and the persistent drip of water echoing on cracked concrete. Every sound reminded him that Liberty City was a living, breathing entity, one that had suffered under the weight of its own betrayal, but was now stirring with the potential of rebellion. He recalled the fervor in the faces of those he had met earlier, the shared dreams of a community desperate to reclaim its dignity had interwoven with his own desire for atonement. Ahead, in an anonymous building, once used as a rundown warehouse, a new meeting was set to convene. Antonio's trusted lieutenants, Johnny, Nivs, had already reconnected with his network, while Rose's voice still resonated in the whispered recollections of the downtrodden. Were assembling a cadre of local fixers, street soldiers, and former allies from every borough of Liberty City. In that cramped, dim-lit room, lit by a single flickering fluorescent bulb, and punctuated by the sound of rain tapping on metal roofs, the plan took on a tangible form. Maps were unrolled across cracked tabletops. Routes were marked with meticulous precision, and coded instructions were exchanged with hushed urgency. Their goal was audacious: to harness the secret routes, spanning Broker's crumbling sidewalks, Duke's rugged storefronts, and Bohan's neglected back alleys, and use them as arteries for a citywide uprising. These covert passageways would connect safe houses, hidouts, and impromptu command centers, creating a resilient network that could intercept enemy movements, reroute supplies, and rally the disillusioned masses. Antonio's voice, roughened by years of solitude and hardened by street justice, carried across the room as he outlined the multi-pronged strategy. "We strike where they least expect it," he declared. "Seize control of the channels that run beneath these streets, and force the hand of those who've ruled us with iron and deceit. This isn't just about survival. It's about reclaiming every inch of our home." He outside the meeting's smoky confines, Liberty City buzzed with its familiar dichotomy. In Algonquin, the upscale corridors remained blissfully indifferent to the undercurrents of rebellion, their bright billboards proclaiming prosperity amidst urban decay. In contrast, the struggling districts of Broker and Dukes simmered with a mix of resentment and latent hope, their inhabitants quietly ready to embrace change. Even the forgotten shadows of Bohan, scarred by despair yet rich with potential, resonated with the energy of revolution. Antonio's plan was to bridge these disparate worlds, to unify a community that had long been divided by circumstance and mistrust, and to forge alliances that could stand against the entrenched powers. When the meeting dispersed into the dark veins of the city, Antonio emerged into the damp night, the cold air invigorating his resolve. Step by step, he retraced his way along narrow, winding streets, the neon reflections rippling across waterlogged pavement like fractured memories. Every footstep carried the weight of his commitment, a promise to those who would soon join him, and to those who had already suffered enough at the hands of Liberty City's oppressors. As he reached a secluded corner near the old docks of Dukes, a subtle hum of activity, the sound of guarded conversations and tentative handshakes, assured him that his network was awakening. The distant wail of a siren, the echo of hurried footsteps, and the soft clink of metal against concrete melded into a prelude of the impending conflict. Antonio's eyes hardened with resolve as he steeled himself for the tasks ahead. Tomorrow, clandestine operations would mobilize, safe houses would be fortified, and secret routes would become lifelines. Tonight, the path had been set, and the city was poised on the brink of a renaissance that promised to scar the old order forever. In that silent moment beneath a sky churned, gray by rain and resolve, Antonio Russo pressed forward into the future. A future where every barren street corner and every abandoned building could become a bastion of hope, every whisper of dissent a rallying cry for change. With determination burning in his chest, he disappeared into the night, a solitary figure carrying the fierce light of rebellion in the heart of Liberty City. Antonio Russo slipped into the night, as if fused with the city's pulse, the rain-dampened streets of Liberty City, guiding him toward the next critical junction of his uprising. Not every city forgives. The electric hum of distant sirens and the muted murmur of nocturnal life merged into a singular cadence, a relentless reminder that every step carried both the promise of freedom and the threat of violent retribution. Hivs, with the confidential map clutched tightly in his gloved hand, he retraced his route through familiar districts, each neighborhood brandishing its own scars and silent rebellions. In Broker's narrow, labyrinthine lanes, faded murals of past legends whispered of lost glories and secrets kept beneath cracked pavement. Here, Antonio paused at a graffiti, tagged wall to study a marker notations, left by a trusted contact, evidence that the network of safe passages was expanding. He could almost hear the voices of those who'd struggled to reclaim their community, each note a pledge for change amid the lingering despair of a place that had always been brutally honest. Navigating onward, Antonio's boots splashed through puddles on the grim sidewalks of Dukes. Despite the relentless drizzle, the district's defiant spirit glowed, faintly in the flicker of scarce streetlights. In that transient brightness, he recalled whispered rumors. An imminent raid had been planned by remnants of the old regime, determined to crush any spark of insurrection. Every shadow in Dukes had potential allies or enemies, and every turn could conceal a trap laid by those desperate to maintain their grip on Liberty City's underbelly. Crossing into Bohan, the urban decay gave way to a more somber atmosphere. A quiet resilience permeated the run, down apartment blocks and deserted corners. Here, the city's heartbeat was slower, more mournful, yet every discarded newspaper and cracked window bore witness to decades of survival against overwhelming odds. Antonio's mind churned with visions of a future where these streets would be reclaimed, where every broken bond and unmet promise could be transformed into a banner of collective resistance. Finally, reaching the outskirts of Algonquin, before the first blush of dawn, the towering skyline, an emblem of unyielding power and corrupt splendor, loomed in stark contrast to the hidden fervor swirling in the lower districts. Among the glittering facades and pristine avenues, Antonio sensed the quiet agitation of the people. Behind every polished storefront, and in every glistening reflection on rain-soaked concrete, there lay a restless desire for justice and renewal. It was here, in the heart of the city's elite district, that the final pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. A constellation of safe houses, secret channels, and dissenting voices, all aligned to challenge the despotic order. As the horizon lightened with the tentative caress of dawn, Antonio pressed forward. He slipped along the edges of darkened subway stations and through abandoned service corridors, each step guided by his unwavering determination and a deep-seated conviction that Liberty City's legacy was not destined to be one of endless despair. His thoughts were a turbulent blend of strategy and memory, recollection of every betrayal that had driven him back, every injustice that had sown the seeds of revolution. Even as the threat of retribution loomed ever larger, so too did his certainty that change was not only necessary but inevitable. In these final, fragile hours before the city fully awoke, Antonio Russo became both observer and catalyst, a lone figure whose resolve had ignited an underground network, poised to reclaim every shattered piece of a once proud urban spirit. Moving silently through the tangible gloom of the early morning, every step he took was a defiant challenge to the corruption that had long held sway over Liberty City. With the rain as his constant companion, and the city's whispered secrets as his guiding light, he advanced into the uncertain future, ready to transform old scars into new symbols of resistance. A living declaration that the time of tyrants was coming to an end. Antonio Russo pressed forward through the wet, dim corridors of Liberty City, his every step punctuated by the distant hum of sirens and the low rumble of an awakening metropolis. The fragile network he'd spent nights assembling was about to be tested. The carefully mapped safe houses in Broker, the secret passageways in Dukes, and the hidden retreats in Bohan were his lifelines against a regime desperate to snuff out dissent. In a narrow, graffiti-stained alley off Bridge Street, he paused to confer with Mickey, a grizzled former enforcer whose loyalty had once been in question, but now shone as a beacon of solidarity. Mickey's whispered words carried news of heavy patrols and the mobilization of old powers aiming to crush any spark of rebellion. The tension was palpable, charged in every droplet of rain that cascaded down the cracked walls around them. This was more than a simple reunion. It was the coalescence of a movement ready to challenge the oppressive order. As the early light began to creep over the horizon, Antonio's thoughts raced across the city's fractured map. In Algonquin, far above the chaos of the lower boroughs, polished windows and high-end storefronts masked an undercurrent of discontent, a silent acknowledgement that even the elite couldn't entirely ignore the rumblings from the streets below. Meanwhile, in Broker and Dukes, community members were already stirring, setting into motion the intricate plan to seize control of dilapidated warehouses and transform abandoned subway stations into hubs of resistance. Navigating back into a forgotten subway station, where rebellious slogans still adorned the grimy walls, Antonio laid out his next orders through terse, determined commands. At first light, we converge. Secure every channel, every safe road. No one gets left behind. His words resonated in the musty air, merging with the echoes of past uprisings that had fought similar battles against tyranny. Each ally there, a tired fixer, a battle-hardened street soldier, a hopeful young recruit, recognized that this moment was the turning point where years of subjugation would be met with relentless, coordinated defiance. Outside, as the rain tapered into a persistent drizzle, and the concrete began to reflect the nascent glow of dawn, Liberty City itself seemed to hold its breath. Shadows shifted in hidden corners, and the rumble of vehicles on distant avenues spoke of forces mobilizing for a counterstrike. Yet, in that charged silence, the city's pulse was unmistakable. Every broken street, every muted whisper from the underclass was preparing for a new era. With unyielding resolve, Antonio Russo stepped out into the rainy morning. Each echo of his footsteps was a promise. The promise of transformation, of reclaiming dignity from decades of corruption. As he merged with the tide of determined citizens spilling into the waking city, he knew that the final confrontation was near. Liberty City's fate was being rewritten in real time, and though danger loomed on every rain-soaked corner, the spirit of rebellion burned brighter than ever. Antonio Russo moved deeper into the chaotic heartbeat of Liberty City as the first true tremors of rebellion began to shake its foundations. Across the rain-slicked streets of Broker, clandestine groups coalesced. Quiet figures slipped through darkened alleys while muffled voices shared warnings of imminent strikes. The distant rumble of police cruisers and armored vehicles blended with the murmurs of ordinary citizens rising in anger, setting the stage for an uprising that would soon be impossible to ignore. In Dukes, the atmosphere grew charged with raw urgency. Amid crumbling facades and graffiti, tagged walls, impromptu barricades sprang up as community members rallied together. Makeshift signal fires, lit in defiant bursts of orange and red beneath flickering streetlights, served as both a beacon and a battle cry. Antonio's carefully mapped routes now testified to a network of safety and resistance, a sprawling underground system preparing to outmaneuver the entrenched powers that sought to maintain their dominion. Over in Bohan, the subdued rhythms of daily survival gave way to a simmering determination. Every abandoned lot, every cracked window, became the canvas for a new narrative, one of collective reclaiming and perseverance. Here, long-suppressed grievances found voice in the tap of secret signals and the hushed yet fervent coordination among allies hidden in shadowed doorways. The streets that had once borne silent witness to despair now resonated with the steady cadence of impending change. Finally, even as Algonquin's glittering high rises and pristine sidewalks maintained their indifferent facade, the murmur of discontent was impossible to stifle. On the edges of the elite district, not every city forgives. A few courageous souls did everything to spread word of rebellion, smuggling crucial information through narrow corridors and back alleys. Antonio Russo, with the weight of his purpose driving every determined step, became the link that bound these disparate forces into one unified call for justice. As the dawn inched closer and the city teetered on the brink of revolution, Antonio re-entered the rain-drenched thoroughfares with unwavering resolve. Each echo of his footsteps was a promise of resistance, each pulse of Liberty City a reminder that the battle for its soul had only just begun. In that charged moment, shadowed by history and drenched in the realism of its corruption, the uprising surged forward, force destined to carve a new future from the bitter past. The sky over Liberty City was a slate, gray canvas streaked with the final remnants of night, the city grinding forward with the unstoppable force of restless ambition and deep-seated discontent. Antonio Russo moved swiftly through the waking streets, his breath a steady rhythm in tune with the pulse of rebellion. Every Broker, Dukes, Bohan, and Algonquin was alive with the energy of a movement no longer confined to whispers in dim, lit rooms. It was here, now threaded through the streets like electricity, ready to erupt. The alleys of Broker were thick with anticipation, figures slipping between shadows with hurried purpose. The safe houses that had once been scattered hideouts had become fully operational command centers, buzzing with last-minute preparations. In Dukes, community leaders had taken up positions, rallying small but determined groups to take control of critical points. The streets surrounding Meadows Park were tense, the air thick with quiet determination as allies armed themselves, not just with weapons, but with knowledge of every hidden pathway and escape route. In Bohan, where survival had always been a daily battle, the uprising felt different. It was less about taking power, and more about refusing to let history repeat itself. The underground channels that once ferried illicit trades now became the arteries of a resistance determined to never fade into the background again. Amid crumbling tenements and flickering streetlights, Antonio could feel the weight of the people behind him, their voices hushed but unwavering. Meanwhile, hooves. In the heart of Algonquin, the city's elite walked with the oblivious certainty of those who believed they were immune to the cracks forming beneath them. But the cracks were there, widening with every quiet act of defiance. Small disruptions in supply chains, messages intercepted, street-level operations breaking free from corrupt oversight. Antonio had planned this final act meticulously, ensuring that even the most fortified institutions felt the tremors of change. As the sky lightened further, Antonio stood at the edge of a rain-dampened street, the scent of concrete and gasoline filling his lungs. Behind him, figures emerged: Johnny, Knives, Rosa Mickey, and the countless allies who had stitched this movement together with blood and grit. No words were needed. The moment had arrived. Liberty City was on the verge of transformation, and when the day ended, it would bear the scars of the battle fought in its streets. Antonio stepped forward, the city holding its breath, waiting for the first strike. The time for strategy was over. It was time to take Liberty City back. Antonio Russo moved through the storm as Liberty City's foundation trembled under the weight of rebellion. Every borough, Broker Dukes, Bohan, and Algonquin had reached the tipping point, the silent rage of the forgotten now roaring to life. The city, long held hostage by corruption and betrayal, was finally unshackling itself, block by block, alley by alley. The safe houses in Broker pulsed with activity, their doors swinging open to welcome allies who had waited years for this moment. Cages of supplies were moved under the cover of darkness, organized into strategic drops for the coming fight. Antonio glanced at a wall plastered with old protest flyers, faded by time yet burning with renewed relevance. The names of lost fighters, etched in black ink, served as a solemn reminder. This war had been waged long before tonight, and it would not end until the last battle had been fought. The rebellion tore through the streets like wildfire. Unmarked vans carried weapons between makeshift armories, meeting points filled with tense whispers. Community leaders stood on the steps of run-down buildings, issuing orders and briefing new recruits. The underground radio, once a voice screaming into the void, now crackled with coordinated calls to action, every frequency tuned to revolution. Bohan was where the old scars ran deepest, but its people were tireless. The abandoned lots once used for illicit trades became rally points. The bridges spanning the Bora transformed into vital chokeholds. The enemy's grip on this sector had already begun to loosen, and Antonio could see it. Liberty City's most battered district had become its fiercest defender. But it was Algonquin where the final strike had to land. The skyline stood like a gilded specter over the city, its wealth insulating the elites from the turmoil below. Yet tonight, Even the pristine avenues were not immune. Information had been leaked, financial accounts compromised, and escape routes sabotaged. The city's power structure was fractured, its rulers shaken for the first time in decades. Antonio stepped onto the rain-soaked pavement. The rhythmic pulse of distant gunfire and roaring engines, forming the overture to Liberty's reckoning. His allies converged, their movements swift and resolute, every action leading toward the inevitable clash. The war for Liberty City had begun, and Antonio Russo was at its center, ready to carve his name into history. Antonio Russo advanced into the heart of the rebellion as the first blush of dawn illuminated the rain-soaked streets of Liberty City. The city's pulse, once muffled by corruption and decay, now throbbed with the determined rhythm of insurgency. In Broker, hidden safe houses buzzed with covert activity. Old allies and new converts moved silently among dim back alleys, setting the stage for their collective strike. Each shadowed corner whispered forgotten promises of freedom that had long been buried under years of exploitation. Across in Dukes, where crumbling facades and resilient murals narrated stories of past defiance, neighborhood veterans gathered in secret. The battered brick walls served as canvases for revolutionary symbols, stencils of hope and scrawled pledges that vowed to upend the old order. Here, amid the echoes of rebellious chants and the clamor of hurried steps, resistance was being forged into a tangible force. Every whispered word and every covert nod was a testament to a community tired of capitulating to tyrants. In Bohan, even the detritus of urban neglect transformed into a rallying point. Abandoned lots and crumbling tenements were repurposed into clandestine meeting spots, where a small but determined cadre of fighters planned their next moves. The piercing sound of dripping water and distant city traffic created a solemn rhythm that underscored both the pain of the past and the promise of a reformed future. For these long, suffering souls, each moment was a reminder that no one would sideline their right to reclaim their home. Meanwhile, in Algonquin's polished corridors, the semblance of order was cracking. Beneath the polished glass and gleaming storefronts, Antonio's carefully planted informants, janitors, disenchanted assistants, and even a few reluctant guards quietly sent signals of dissent. When the covert command was given, routine shifts would dissolve into chaos. Not every city forgives, and every secure door would become a portal through which the rebellion could break. The elite might have thought themselves untouchable, but the delicate balance of their power was now being undermined by the very citizens they had forgotten. Inside an aging armored van that rattled through the rain-dappled streets of Dukes, Antonio reviewed the final details on a makeshift map marked with secret routes and safe houses spanning Broker, Dukes, Bohan, and Algonquin. His lieutenants, each battle, hardened and resolute, confirmed their positions through whispered codes over static, laced radios. Every calculated instruction, every silent acknowledgement, was a step toward the impending downfall of the entrenched regime. The network of hidden pathways that Antonio had meticulously stitched together was about to serve as the arteries of a righteous uprising. Reaching the outer edge of Algonquin, Antonio stopped at an unremarkable service door, a threshold between the stark opulence within and the seething revolt just beyond. He paused, pressed his hand to the cold metal, and let the magnitude of the moment sink in. For him, for Broker's weathered survivors, for Duke's defiant spirit, and for Bohan's enduring soul, this was the culmination of decades of oppression and unfulfilled dreams. Every street, every dilapidated building, and every hurried step led inexorably to this point, the final battle to reclaim Liberty City. In that charged moment, as the city trembled on the brink of revolutionary upheaval, Antonio Russo stepped forward with unwavering resolve. The synchronized signals from every borough merged into a single, resolute roar. The voice of a people who had long been silenced, now rising to challenge their oppressors. With each determined stride, he carried the weight of countless lost hopes, transforming them into a blazing determination to reshape the future. The city held its breath. Now, in the early light of a new day, made fierce with promise, the final act of rebellion began. Cleansing surge of action that would redefine Liberty City. Breathe new life into its shattered streets, and etch Antonio Russo's name into the annals of its ongoing struggle for justice. Antonio Russo's command resonated like a battle cry through the rain-drenched arteries of Liberty City. In that suspended moment, when every secret route, every carefully guarded safe house, and every whispered promise of revolution coalesced, the final act of the uprising erupted into a maelstrom of defiant chaos. From deep within the labyrinth of Algonquin's opulent corridors, where the glitter of wealth once bastioned the corrupt elite, infiltrators had already executed their part of the plan. Discreet explosions muffled by cloaks of smoke shattered the sterile calm of luxury, sending ripples of panic through pristine office towers and polished storefronts alike. On the streets below, the controlled demolition of select security checkpoints, planned months in advance, allowed Antonio's network to surge forward. In Broker, the impact was immediate. The narrow alleys and rundown storefronts that had long witnessed sorrow now teemed with a meticulously orchestrated resistance. Grimy hands gripped makeshift weapons as ordinary citizens, emboldened by years of neglect and indignity, took their positions. Every dim light in a forgotten corner became a signal in the conductor's symphony of rebellion. The once muted voices of the downtrodden now roared with the fervor of long-suppressed hope, and the cobblestones began to echo with determined footsteps marching toward destiny. Meanwhile, in Dukes, where the urban decay had been both a crucible and a canvas for defiance, barricades were raised overnight. Community fighters, veterans of countless street skirmishes, stood shoulder to shoulder with newly awakened allies. In the flickering glow of lampposts, murals of long-forgotten heroes merged seamlessly with fresh slogans hastily sprayed across cracked walls. Here, every shout, every hurried signal over hidden radios, was a spark that fanned the flames of insurrection. For too long, Dukes had been the silent witness to the tyranny of the few. Tonight, it became the battleground for the many. In Bohan, life itself had been hardened by survival, and that hardened spirit ignited in furious rebellion. Abandoned lots, once marked only by neglect, burst into impromptu battlegrounds as revolutionary cells emerged from the shadows. The subdued whispers of everyday conversations transformed into resolute proclamations of autonomy. Here, the underground network, formed by a patchwork of old allies and courageous strangers, ensured that every secret passageway, every forgotten subway station, served as a conduit for the uprising. The collective heartbeat of Bohan, persistent and unyielding, reverberated with the promise that change was no longer a distant dream. At the epicenter of the final clash, Antonio Russo emerged from a derelict service door on the threshold of Algonquin, his eyes alight with unbridled determination. In the distance, the controlled chaos of his allies' assault, unfolded alarms, blared, the confused shouts of security dissolved into disarray, and panicked footsteps echoed against cold marble floors. With every calculated move, Antonio led the charge deeper into the heart of oppression, determined to dismantle the structures that had for too long chained Liberty City to the whims of the powerful. Inside the corridors of a once secure high-rise, loyal insurgents seized control of surveillance cameras and communication systems. Their swift takeover meant that even the polished arrogance of Algonquin's elite was not immune to the relentless pulse of revolution. As Antonio advanced, the oppressive veneer of order fractured in real time, a reminder that every monument to corruption was susceptible to the transformative power of shared resolve. Every encounter in those hollowed halls became a microcosm of the broader battle, a clash between a ruthless old guard desperately clinging to power and an emerging tide of unity that could not be denied. Outside, the symphony of Uprising reached a fevered pitch. Explosions of light as street barricades were overwhelmed, the echoing rattle of gunfire juxtaposed against the soulful hymns of resistance sung by those reclaiming their neighborhoods. Antonio's voice, transmitted over improvised channels, cut through the clamor. For every broken promise, for every ounce of pain, we rise! Let Liberty City be reborn tonight. The words reverberated across districts, shaking the foundations of buildings and stirring even the quietest corners of doubt in the ranks of their oppressors. In that maelstrom of fury and hope, Antonio Russo became both symbol and spearhead. The man who had once returned to a city of ghosts now led a living, breathing revolution. A mosaic of every face, every district, and every individual who had suffered silent injustice for far too long. As he pressed forward through corridors choked with smoke and valor, the rainy dawn bore witness to a reckoning that promised to rewrite history. Every stride, every calculated maneuver, was a defiant assertion that the time for subjugation was over. Liberty City, with all its scars, its neglect, and its raw, unbridled potential, trembled on the cusp of transformation. The old order crumbled beneath the relentless advance of a people, united by hope and hardened by experience. And as the uprising swept across its streets, like a tide reclaiming lost shores, Antonio Russo's gaze fixed on the horizon, where the promise of a new day shone, brilliant and undeniable, beneath the dissipating shadows of tyranny. Under the relentless downpour of a bruised dawn, Antonio Russo pressed forward in the heart of Liberty City's seizure. The city, once quiet in its decay, now roared with the tumult of rebellion, and every step Antonio took was a defiant drumbeat signaling that the old order was crashing down. Amid smoldering ruins and fractured glass remnants of Algonquin's mighty towers, insurgents emerged from the shadows of once secure corridors, storming barricaded intersections and reclaiming once untouchable spaces. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning fuel and rubble, a tangible reminder that every fragment of the city was now a battleground where history was being violently rewritten. In Broker, once a haven of misty despair, safe houses and hidden kitchens transformed into nerve centers of resistance. Under the flickering neon of aging storefronts, ordinary citizens in battle, hardened veterans rallied together, passing sealed envelopes with coded instructions and mapping out the labyrinthine back alleys that served as lifelines. Here, every splintered door and crumbling brick bore the scars of strife, yet also whispered the promise of rebirth as families and local leaders united against a regime they had long been forced to endure. Antonio's presence was a catalyst. A burning ember passed from hand to hand, igniting the courage of those who had once resigned themselves to the status quo. Across in Dukes, the transformation was equally visceral. Walls once resigned to layers of graffiti, now pulsed with symbols of defiance remade by passionate hands. Impromptu barricades sprung up along cracked sidewalks, their rough, hewn timbers a testament to collective resolve. Here, the city's downtrodden turned their despair into fists and footsteps, repurposing abandoned lots as staging grounds for strategic maneuvers. The sound of hurried footsteps, murmurings over static-filled radios, and the guttural echoes of determined shouts blended into a singular, unstoppable call for justice. Every soul in Dukes knew that, in the chaos of destruction, there lay the seeds of a new order, one that would tear down the pillars of corruption brick by brick. In the darker reaches of Bohan, Where neglect had once paralyzed hope, mobile command posts and repurposed transit tunnels emerged as the arteries of insurgency. Sunglasses, scavenged cell phones, and analog radios became the tools of a grassroots force, one that communicated in whispers and secret signals through the maze of forgotten subways and neglected alleys. These hidden passageways, once exploited by illicit merchants, now served a nobler purpose, transforming into a vast network that connected isolated groups of fighters, ensuring that every narrow street was lit by the relentless spirit of resistance. Here, every echoing footstep was a promise that the chains of subjugation were about to shatter. Even in the sanitized, high-rise corridors of Algonquin, the veneer of cold opulence was not impervious. Behind the reflective glass and manicured lawns, disillusioned employees and unsung insiders fed critical information to Antonio's trusted circle. The polished exteriors, symbols of an out-of-touch elite, trembled under the weight of calculated sabotage. Digital door locks bypassed with stealth, panic buttons, triggered in boardrooms, and discreet power cuts that turned secure facilities into temporary chaos zones. The once insular world of Algonquin was being eroded from within. A slow, deliberate contagion of dissent spreading like wildfire through its glittered avenues. In the midst of this orchestrated upheaval, Antonio Russo became both the linchpin and the emblem of a movement that harnessed every fractured piece of Liberty City. Standing at the precipice of a commandeered service door in Algonquin, he paused to survey the sprawling urban battlefield. Overhead, clouds spilled a final cascade of rain, as if the heavens themselves were weeping for the old ways. In that tremulous moment, the city's future was as uncertain as it was exhilarating. A vast canvas ready to be repainted with the blood, sweat, and undying hope of its people. Then, with a defiant glare piercing through the drizzling gloom, Antonio strode forward once more. Every step carried with it the weight of uncounted sacrifices, lost friends, shattered dreams, and a tireless yearning for justice. The static of insurgent radios, the clatter of barricade adjustments, and the distant echoes of enemy retreat fused into a symphony of liberation. Liberty City, in all its sprawling chaos, was rising from the ashes of tyranny and neglect. The revolution was no longer confined to shadowed whispers. It had erupted into a full-fledged, uncontrollable force. And as Antonio led his resilient band into the heart of a battered metropolis, the boundaries between past wounds and future promise blurred, merging into a single, unyielding drive to reclaim every inch of freedom. In that long, harrowing advance, the city was being reborn, not as a monument to corruption, but as a testament to the courage and determination of those who dared to stand up and fight. And while the day promised both uncertainty and danger, it also shone with a fierce, undeniable light, the light of resistance that could never be extinguished. Antonio Russo pressed onward as the echo of rebellion vibrated through every rain-drenched stone of Liberty City. In the aftermath of the initial shockwave that shattered the regime's facade, insurgent forces surged like a tidal wave through the city's veins. Now, as darkness yielded to a stubborn pre-dawn, Russo led his cadre along hidden corridors and shattered thoroughfares, determined to cement their uprising into an irreversible transformation. Every step was a calculated plunge into the heart of enemy territory, each footfall a defiant drumbeat driving the insurgency deeper into the strongholds of a corrupt order that had once reigned unchallenged. In the narrow back streets of Dukes, where rebel fighters had already repurposed abandoned warehouses into fortified bastions, hushed radio transmissions revealed the enemy's frantic countermeasures. Missile sirens wailed in the distance as a convoy of armored vehicles attempted to regroup, only to be met by fierce resistance. Explosions rocked deserted industrial zones, painting the urban night in bursts of orange and red. Antonio's trusted lieutenants, Johnny, Nibs, Rosa, and Mickey, rallied squads with swift, decisive orders, turning choke points in Broker and forgotten subway stations in Bohan into arteries of defiance. The insurgents moved like shadows orchestrated by purposely silent, deadly, and united in their demand for change. Across Algonquin, the jewel of the city's elite, the veneer of untouchable opulence began to crumble. Antonio had long planted seeds of dissent among disenchanted workers in high security buildings, and now those seeds bore bitter fruit. As covert teams breached digital defenses and hijacked surveillance feeds, the pristine corridors of power plunged into disarray. The revolution was no longer contained to the worn out neighborhoods of the downtrodden. It was spreading upward, infiltrating boardrooms and turning the gilded symbols of might into embers, waiting to be fanned by the fire of popular uprising. Amid this chaotic crescendo, Russo pushed deeper into enemy territory, slipping through a maze of abandoned service tunnels beneath Liberty City's slick pavements. He navigated a labyrinth that had once been a relic of a bygone era, but now served as their secret network of escape routes and tactical advances. His mind raced with both strategy and memory. Every alleyway he passed held the whispered sorrows of lost hopes and the fervent promises of a people reborn through struggle. The resistance had coalesced into a formidable force, one that knew sacrifice and was ready to pay the price for a future free of tyranny. As the first tentative light of dawn broke over the horizon, Antonio Russo emerged onto a rooftop overlooking the sprawl of a city in revolt. Below, the synchronized chaos of insurgent operations surged beneath him, living mosaic of defiance stretching from the muddy lanes of Broker, through the resilient spirit of Dukes and Bohan, to the crumbling bastions of Algonquin's power. In that moment, he realized that Liberty City was not merely a battleground, it was a canvas upon which the future was being painfully and beautifully redrawn by the hands of those brave enough to rise. With unyielding resolve carved into every fiber of his being, Antonio set his gaze on the unfolding horizon, ready to guide the revolution into its next decisive chapter. Antonio Russo advanced into the bruise-colored morning as Liberty City trembled under the weight of its own revolution. The storm of uprising had reached a fevered pitch overnight, and as the dark clouds began to break, every raindrop that clung to the battered streets carried the promise of a new order. The battle lines were drawn in ink on crumbling walls and whispered along the narrow corridors of Broker, Dukes, Bohan, and Algonquin, a city divided by poverty and power, yet unified in its desperate cry for change. In the rain-soaked back streets of Broker, small clusters of insurgents gathered in hastily fortified safehouses. Every shuttered door had been repurposed, and every derelict storefront transformed into a makeshift command post. The once muted murmurs of the downtrodden now rang out with urgency as local leaders coordinated their next maneuver. Antonio's trusted lieutenants, armed with coded messages and maps scribbled in haste, ensured that each rebel formation was in place. Here, amidst the faded neon and lingering mist, every rebel knew that the fight was more than just a mere defiance. It was a reclaiming of dignity meticulously denied by years of systemic neglect. Not far from there, in the crumbling neighborhoods of Dukes, the echoes of past revolts pulsed through the veins of the urban sprawl. In narrow alleyways and along graffiti-stained walls, community fighters paraded banners of resistance and chanted slogans that had long been silenced by authority. Makeshift barricades, overrun by both ingenuity and raw emotion, served as defiant symbols against the established regime. The clang of metal against concrete resonated with each determined step in the fight for justice, a testament to the unyielding spirit of a people who had suffered too long in the shadows. Deep within the neglected heart of Bohan, the insurgency assumed a more clandestine form. Underground channels, once used by smugglers and those on the fringes, now pulsed with the synchronized rhythm of resistance. Secret meetings took place in abandoned transit tunnels and derelict lots, where wary yet resolute souls shared their clandestine plans for a coordinated strike. Every covert whisper carried the weight of accumulated grievances, and every coded signal was a declaration that the age of submission was irrevocably drawing to a close. Over in Algonquin, the crown of the city's elite and the bastion of those shielded by wealth and privilege, a subtler kind of warfare was unfolding. Disgruntled insiders and disillusioned employees, now unwilling to bear the burdens of complicity, sent surreptitious signals to Antonio's inner circle. High security offices and swollen boardrooms began to experience unsettling disruptions. Digital locks bypassed, surveillance systems hijacked, and the sterile hum of polished corridors corrupted by the chaos of dissent. In Algonquin's pristine towers, the veneer of untouchable power started to fracture as the rebellion made its calculated and irreversible entry. Amid this symphony of uprising, Antonio Russo led his small band of elite fighters through the labyrinthine underbelly of the city. With each determined stride through rain-washed streets and abandoned subways, he embodied the resilience of a people who had nothing left to lose but all to fight for. His eyes, steeled by years of betrayal and loss, scanned every shadowed corner for signs of enemy reinforcements, while his mind rehearsed the final moves of a strategy born of desperation and tempered by hope. The clandestine network of escape routes, meticulously planned in nights of devious plotting, now formed a web through which the revolution could pulse, rapid, silent, and unstoppable. When the final confrontation erupted along a long-forgotten industrial corridor bordering Dukes and Bohan, Antonio was at its epicenter, a living symbol of defiance amid chaos. Explosions tore through abandoned warehouses, as reluctant alliances among old enemies and newfound friends were solidified in the heat of battle. The roar of insurgents clashed with the panicked retreat of security forces, and in that cacophony, the promise of a liberated Liberty City shone bright despite the darkness. Every shout, every clash of steel, and every fervent declaration served as the anthem of a people determined to tear down the pillars of their oppression. In the midst of the chaotic melee, as the distant light of dawn seeped through the battle-worn skyline, Antonio paused atop a battered service door. He surveyed the sprawling urban theater of war, a city reeling with both agony and exhilaration, where every broken window and every defiant mural spoke of collective resilience. In that timeless moment, he felt the pulse of Liberty City surge through his veins, a reminder that the price of freedom was paid in both sacrifice and relentless courage. With a final, resolute exhale, Antonio Russo rejoined his comrades, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the tumult of revolution met the soft glow of a new day. The battle was far from over, but each step forward ignited hope in outstretched hands and resilient hearts. In the rain-drenched, unyielding streets of Liberty City, the uprising continued its march, a raw, unstoppable tide that promised to reshape the future, one defiant stride at a time. Antonio Russo moved like a phantom through the smoldering remnants of a city at war with itself. Under a drab, ashen sky, he navigated through avenues scarred by the recent tumult, streets where shattered windows of once proud buildings glinted like broken promises, and the acrid tang of burning rubber and debris hung heavy in the air. Every step resonated with the memories of past betrayals and the unspoken hope for a reclaimed tomorrow as insurgents and broker Dukes, Bohan, and Algonquin united in defiant solidarity. In a commandeered municipal hall, its pristine glass facade now fractured by the chaos. The revolutionaries had repurposed once sterile corridors into nerve centers of resistance. Antonio paused amid a congregation of battle-worn fighters and whispered operatives, each drawing strength from the resolute hum of clandestine radios and the steady beat of collective determination. With every hushed command and every nod of acknowledgement, the insurgent network, conceived in the forgotten back alleys of Liberty City, expanded its reach, setting into motion plans devised during countless sleepless nights and fraught moments of clarity. As he strode through narrow lanes, where the echoes of past protests mingled with the dynamic pulse of renewed purpose, Antonio's eyes caught sight of a mural splashed on a barnacled wall in Dukes, depicting heroes of bygone rebellions whose defiant silhouettes now seemed to whisper encouragement. That vision burned in his chest, fueling a silent vow that the revolution he had ignited would not only dismantle corruption but also honor the sacrifices of those who had long suffered under indifferent regimes. Meanwhile, in the underbelly of Bohan, insurgents had taken to the clandestine corridors of abandoned transit tunnels and subterranean passageways. There, the rhythmic drip of water on cold concrete served as a metronome for strategic maneuvers and covert meetings. Each hushed conversation and coded signal was a promise that the underdogs, long confined to the margins, would wrest back control over the streets that were their birthright. The network of secret routes, overseen and nurtured by Antonio's trusted lieutenants, had become the lifeline of a movement that thrived even in the depths of urban decay. Not far off in Algonquin, the glittering veneer of wealth and power began to fracture under the relentless pressure of dissent from within. Inside once impenetrable towers, defiant whispers and surreptitious actions disrupted digital fortresses and rerouted streams of capital meant to keep the elite insulated. Here, insurgents who had long hidden behind tailored suits and guarded offices revealed their resolve by orchestrating a digital coup, turning the tools of the oppressors into instruments of liberation. As dusk threatened to swallow the remaining daylight, Antonio led a daring sortie into a critical communication hub nestled deep within Algonquin's labyrinthine heart. Under the cover of a light rain that blurred the line between shadow and substance, his team bypassed security protocols with precise efficiency. In the ensuing melee, a chaotic dance of stealth and valor amid flickering screens and echoing alarms, every shouted order, every burst of defiant gunfire, punctuated the final, decisive phase of the uprising. The clash of metal and determination echoed through sterile hallways that momentarily transformed into battlegrounds for justice. In the aftermath, as the smoke began to clear and the first tentative rays of a new dawn crept over the horizon, Liberty City revealed itself anew. Though scarred by yesterday's battles, the city now bore the nascent symbols of a future reclaimed. Antonio's face, streaked with rain and resolve, mirrored the collective spirit of those who had dared to stand against entrenched tyranny. Each shattered piece of urban decay was being pieced together into a mosaic of hope, a promise that every dark corner was slowly yielding to the light of resistance. With steady purpose and an unwavering heart, Antonio Russo pressed onward, embodying the spirit of a revolution that would not be silenced. His every step through the rain, slicked streets recalled the fallen and inspired the hopeful. As Liberty City, too, took its first collective breath in the birth of a new era, a time when courage, unity, and tenacity would rekindle the flame of freedom, forging a future from the fragments of a long-forgotten past. Under a bruised twilight that mingled fading light with encroaching darkness, the penultimate chapter began. Antonio Russo gathered with his inner circle in a forgotten courtyard on the edge of Broker, where the rain had washed away the detritus of old betrayals but revealed the scars of a long brewing rebellion. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and resolve. A living, breathing promise that tonight the balance of power would be irrevocably altered. In the cramped meeting place, illuminated by the intermittent flicker of a tired street lamp, Russo's lieutenants reviewed the final intelligence gathered from every corner of Liberty City. Messages from Duke spoke of newly erected barricades manned by zealous fighters. Bohan's underground network had intercepted orders from the old regime, hinting at a desperate counteroffensive mobilizing beneath the surface. Even in Algonquin, where sterile wealth and privilege had once insulated the elite, murmurs of discontent now formed coded signals sent through the corridors of power. Each update resonated like a clarion call. Tonight, the insurgency would converge upon the enemy's stronghold and deliver a crushing blow. Antonio stepped out into the chill rain, his coat pulled high and his eyes scanning the restless streets. Every surface, every alleyway, held memories of past wounds, but now they pulsed with the promise of retribution. In Broker, local fighters had transformed abandoned storefronts into command posts, their radio chatter a constant backdrop to the subtle thrum of hundreds of heartbeats synchronized in purpose. In Dukes, the gritty resilience of the community was apparent in every hastily constructed barricade and every mural emblazoned with defiant slogans echoing the names of forgotten heroes. Bohan's shadowed lanes, long obscured by neglect, now teemed with whispered conversations and tight, lipped nods that signified the unity of purpose among its people. And even the high towers of Algonquin flickered with vulnerability, as infiltrators hacked surveillance systems and sowed disarray amongst the complacent custodians of power. The penultimate assault was to be the culmination of months of meticulous planning and uncountable sacrifices. Antonio Russo, a solitary figure tempered by hardship and optimism, led a final reconnaissance through the labyrinth of service tunnels beneath the city, a network that had become the insurgents' lifeline. In the murky passageways, where echoes of dripping water harmonized with furtive footsteps, he met with messengers from allied cells. With each secret handshake and coded instruction exchanged in the dim corridor, not every city forgives. The rebellion's framework solidified into an unbreakable chain that stretched from the downtrodden back alleys of Broker to the guarded corridors of Algonquin's grand edifices. Above ground, as the night deepened and the wind carried murmurs of both apprehension and defiance, the insurgents mobilized with swift precision. Far from the public eye, a coordinated diversion shattered a key checkpoint along a major thoroughfare, drawing the enemy's attention like moths to an ignited flame. Across the city, small teams slipped into strategic positions, armed not only with makeshift weaponry, but with a resolute belief in the transformative justice that had spurred them to arms. Every district pulsed with the unified rhythm of impending change, as each rebel soldier, each cunning strategist, and every marginalized soul played their part. Standing at the precipice of what could be the final act, Antonio paused on a rain-slick rooftop that overlooked a sprawling industrial district, a bastion of the enemy's tyranny. The view was surreal. The ghostly silhouettes of cargo cranes and warehouses, drenched in the pallid glow of emergency lights, contrasted sharply with the uprising seething in the veins of the city below. In that charged moment, with the distant rumble of dissent rising like an unstoppable tide, he allowed himself a brief respite, a silent prayer for those lost, a vow for those yet to come, and a promise that Liberty City would rise, reborn through fire and sacrifice. With the weight of centuries of injustice pressing upon him, Antonio Russo descended back into the urban labyrinth. His path was lit by flickering neon and the resolute fire of a people reclaiming their destiny. The penultimate stage of the uprising was now set in motion. a symphony of clandestine signals, calculated strikes, and unwavering solidarity. Every street, every shadow, every heartbeat in Broker, Dukes, Bohan, and Algonquin vibrated with the truth that this night was not merely another battle. It was the decisive precursor to the final reckoning. As the first hints of a pale, determined dawn began to edge the horizon, the city held its collective breath. Antonio Russo led his forces onward into the darkened arteries of Liberty City, each step forward, forging an unassailable bridge between past grievances and the promise of a new order. In that long, relentless march, the penultimate assault crystallized into an enduring message. The time of tyranny was ending, and the birth of a reimagined, free city was imminent. A truth that would be etched into every rain-soaked stone and whispered in every liberated corner. Antonio Russo stood at the ruined threshold of a once mighty city hall, his breath mingling with the cold mist as the final echoes of conflict faded into solemn silence. Now, as the storm of rebellion subsided into a hush that enveloped every broken street and shattered window, the revolution reached its conclusive crescendo, a moment where the old order finally crumbled beneath the inexorable weight of righteous defiance. From the ashes of battle in Broker, Dukes, Bohan, and even the glittering corridors of Algonquin, Liberty City began to reveal her new face. The barricades that had once been hastily constructed symbols of resistance were slowly dismantled by citizens whose courage had been tempered in fire. In Broker's narrow alleys, where insurgents had taken refuge in musty basements and repurposed warehouses, the air now carried an unmistakable scent of renewal. Luis, a former street vendor who had become a trusted leader in the Uprising, emerged from the ruins to comfort a crying child and help raise fallen supplies. The defiant murals on crumbling walls, once filled with slogans of vengeance and hope, bore new strokes that celebrated not only survival, but a vision of collective rebirth. Across the cracked sidewalks of Dukes, where voices had joined together in a chorus against tyranny, community members set about rebuilding what had been lost. Makeshift medical stations, hastily assembled in once abandoned storefronts, transformed into centers of healing and remembrance. Elderly residents, who had long feared retribution, now spoke with tremulous optimism about a future unburdened by the oppressive weight of injustice. The very streets, worn from decades of neglect, seemed to pulse with the promise of change as families gathered to clear debris and repaint the scars of conflict with colors of hope. Deep beneath the surface in Bohan, where the resistance had flourished in secret tunnels and forgotten transit lines, a network of solidarity continued to knit together the fabric of community. Former rivals, united by loss and purpose, convened in hidden chambers to plan the reconstruction of their lives. Their whispered strategies were no longer directed solely against an enemy, but toward building safe havens, schools, community centers, and markets where trust and mutual support could flourish. In those dimly lit passageways, every coded message and cautious handshake was now imbued with the promise of a liberated tomorrow, one where the dark legacy of the past gave way to light and renewal. High above, in Algonquin, the bastion of once untouchable wealth and power, the corruption that had reigned supreme was exposed in shards of digital evidence and public outcry. Disillusioned insiders who had risked everything now stood alongside longtime radicals, their reports and testimonies sparking governmental inquiries that promised sweeping reform. In the corridors of polished office towers that moments ago had reverberated with the arrogance of overindulgence, there now lingered an uneasy sense of accountability. The elite, stripped of their veneer and confronted with the palpable cries of the citizens below, began to respect the unassailable voice of the people. The once impenetrable walls of Algonquin's power now trembled under the call for transparency and justice. At the center of it all, Antonio Russo surveyed the panorama of a city in metamorphosis. His own battle, scarred face reflected an amalgam of sorrow, resolve, and an emerging hope that had been forged in countless moments of loss and victory. The final clash had not been without cost. Lives had been spilled, dreams shattered, and scars deepened. But in their wake lay fertile ground for regeneration. Every debris-laden corner whispered of sacrifice. Every faint heartbeat among the subdued rubble sang of a community determined to reclaim its dignity. Gathering with his closest comrades amid the shattered remnants of a once proud public square, Antonio spoke softly, yet with the clarity of one who had seen the crashing waves of chaos and had emerged unbowed. Today, we honor the lost and embrace the future, he said, his voice carrying over the quiet, determined murmurs of his allies. Liberty City was not born of compromises, but of courage. Let us rebuild not as we once were, but as we must be. A people who rise from ashes to craft a new destiny. As the pale light of a resolute dawn began to pierce the lingering gloom, the citizens of Liberty City came together in a moment of quiet rebirth. The oppressive power structures had been dismantled by the fairy spirit of rebellion, and in their place rose the fragile, yet unyielding framework of a community renewed. The city would heal slowly, each block and alley a testament to the struggle and the unity that had prevailed. The revolution had ended not with the echo of gunfire or the rage of vengeance, but with the gentle murmur of hope, of lives being rebuilt and wounds being mended. Antonio Russo, now both a symbol of resistance and a humble servant of a collective dream, walked into the soft caress of early morning. Behind him, the remnants of war lay silent, bearing witness to the transformation of despair into possibility. Ahead, the horizon glowed with promise, a new chapter written with the sacrifices of the past and the resilient spirit of a people no longer willing to be subjugated. In that transcendent light, Liberty City began its long, arduous journey toward true freedom. A freedom earned through blood, commitment, and the indomitable will to rise and create a future where justice and unity reign supreme. Did you know we also have stories based on Vice City? Check out our channel to discover them. Now get out of here before I decide your wallet is worth more than our friendship.